I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Nam Shi Chun, Chief Executive Officer of Energy Market Authority, Mr. Wee Boon Ho, Chief Executive Officer of Jurong Port, Ms. Cindy Lim, Chief Executive Officer of Capital Infrastructure, and Ms. Esther, Chief Sustainability Officer of City Developments Limited on the panel today. This panel will be moderated by Mr. Toh Wee Kiang, Director of the National Energy Transformation Office from EMA. I will now invite Wee Kiang on screen to moderate this session. Over to you, Wee Kiang.
Thank you, Xueping, for the introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the panel discussion for Energy Innovation 2021. As you all know, the theme for this year's Energy Innovation event is Enabling Sustainable Energy Transformation. And energy transformation is precisely what my department was set up 4 years ago to do, to drive energy transformation, because EMA at that point saw that we will need a new strategy to thrive in a carbon-constrained world while still maintaining energy affordability and ensuring energy security. Now, I've interacted with all the companies participating in this panel discussion, whether the specific individuals involved or the companies. So I can assure you they're all at the forefront of the energy transition. And hence, they definitely will be able to offer valuable insights to our audience. So even as the audience, even as you start to send in your questions via the Mentimeter, let me start off by asking each of the panelists in turn a question so you can kick off the discussion. And my first question will be to Shi Chun. He's the Chief Executive of the Energy Market Authority. Shi Chun, please help the audience piece together some of the energy trends that you see happening in the world today. And by that, what I mean is that in the last 2 years, EMA has come out with terms like energy story, and then of course under the Singapore Green Plan, we have another term called the energy reset. And these obviously address fundamental changes that are happening in the energy landscape. Can you help the audience put some of these pieces together?
Well, thank you very much, Wee Kiang. And thank you again to all the panelists for joining us today as the Energy Innovation Forum. That's a good question. And really, most people see only certain parts of how the energy sector is developing. It's pretty hard to see how everything comes together. I think of it in terms of Ds. So 4 Ds. The first D is demand, and that is increasing. So all around the world, as economic growth increases, as urbanization takes place, even in Singapore with GDP growth, the electricity demand will only increase and energy demand will go up as well. There's of course decarbonisation. This is a global effort. Climate change is an imperative. It's a global critical imperative for all of us, including Singapore. And likewise for us, we are trying to decarbonize our power sector as well, bring in more solar and other low carbon alternatives. Another trend is digitalization. And here we see the introduction of a lot more technology, new sensors, new ways of managing the grid, managing demand as well, that would enable us to make better use of energy, enable us to be more efficient with our energy as well. Then the 4th D is decentralization. And here, we see this trend, which Minister of State Low also talked about a virtual power plant where we decentralize and spread out the generation sources and demand sources, right? So they don't have to be large power plants, which we have always traditionally seen in the past. But here, the decentralization of both production as well as demand, which would bring about different challenges to the electricity grid and the power system, but also enables a different level of technology and innovation and a more efficient grid at the end of the day. Right, so that's just my take on it. 4 different Ds: demand, digitalization, decarbonization, and decentralization. Thank you.
If I could just follow up on one of the things that you talked about, and really I think this is an important thing for some of our audience members to understand. Singapore faces some fundamental constraints, even as we try to go green, even as we try to go as close to net zero as possible. Can you talk a little bit about some of these constraints on, at least on the supply side? How is the situation like for solar potential, maybe hydrogen, electricity imports, and so forth?
Well, I would say that our constraints have been ever present since the very beginning. We have no natural resources. We don't have gas, oil, or fuel, or coal, or anything like that. And we've been importing almost all our energy needs all this time, right? So 95% of our electricity is generated from natural gas, and that's imported from our neighboring countries as well as across the world. So that's a constraint that we face. And even as we move to different types of energy sources, we are similarly constrained as well, right? So one other issue that we have is, of course, our limited land that we have here. So, Moslow again talked about that when she spoke about solar. We are a small country. We call ourselves alternative energy disadvantaged. And there are only so many places you can put solar panels on. We are aggressively putting it on rooftop spaces. We are exploring and putting it on water bodies, offshore and inland water bodies as well, vacant land that we can make use of for a few years before it's developed into something else. And we have developed technology that will allow us to move the solar panels around Singapore just to make use of every bit of solar energy. But that's still a constraint that we face in terms of the amount of land that we have. And even as we go forward and think about other alternative sources of energy, people talk about hydrogen today and so on, we'll still face the same constraints as we have always faced. We can't produce it here. We don't have a lot of natural resources. So some places have plenty of renewable energy and they can produce green hydrogen. So that's a big benefit that they have. We don't have that. We don't have a lot of land for many of these production facilities that are needed. So we are constrained in many different ways, but at the same time, it gives us the opportunity to make use of technology, to make use of partnerships and to build up partnerships with neighboring countries, as well as the various companies and research institutions that we have to further develop new technological solutions that will benefit Singapore, as well as the rest of the world, because many of these solutions are exportable at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Shishun. Let me move to Boon Ho next. And the question I have for you actually ties in very well with one of the questions that came in from the audience, which is the role of hydrogen as a future fuel. And my question is this: Jurong Port, obviously, you already do bulk cargo, things like cement and steel. Do you see Jurong Port having a role in the import of alternative fuels like hydrogen?
Yes, I do think that Jurong Port, as the premier, or if you like, the largest multi-purpose port operator in Singapore, should find a meaningful way to contribute towards the overall decarbonisation efforts of the country. Future fuels, if you like, is a form of cargo, if it's going to be imported, that is, via carriers such as ammonia or liquid hydrogen or whatever other carrier there could be. If you consider it a cargo, and if it's going to be likely transported by sea on a ship and has to be handled on the shores of Singapore, then a port operator, a multi-purpose port operator such as Jurong Port would see itself as lending a hand in trying to effectively handle the cargo, to store the cargo, and to redistribute this cargo for use in power generation. So definitely yes. In the same vein, while Jurong Port is handling a lot of cement and steel, which are basically going towards national development, that amount of cargo by way of tonnage is going to be outstripped by the amount of oil that we'll be handling. Jurong Port is also currently the largest independent oil storage operator in Singapore. About 3 million cubes of oil storage, from clean petroleum products to fuel oil for the bunkering, helping Singapore maintain its status as the largest bunkering hub in the world. So if you like, the handling of all these current fuels, which are fossil fuels, should, we believe, transition also to future fuels.
Thank you. My next question for Cindy is, could you talk a little bit about how Keppel is pivoting to address the energy transition? And by that, my comment is this, there's been a lot of news about capital. I remember a couple of weeks ago, there was a person that talked about floating cities, which really is an amazing and intriguing idea. And obviously, you have a very strong offshore business, which clearly can be pivoted to do more on offshore renewables. You also have data centers. So obviously, the provision of green electricity is something of concern because everyone wants data centers to be green. Can you tell us a little bit more about how Capital as a company, as a group, is pivoting towards this?
Thank you, Wee Kiong. Essentially, maybe let me just set the stage a bit. Pre-COVID-19, we know that there's already very rapid and massive urbanization and digitalization macro trends. And this has actually put a very unprecedented demand for energy as well as stresses for the environment. Then on the supply side, we also see a lot of advancement in clean techs, renewable, as well as disruptive business models and very prolific ecosystem partnership. So the COVID-19 has only accentuated and accelerated the need for cleaner cities and cleaner industries. So from Capital Group's perspective, in terms of landscape going forward, we see the convergence of these three factors created, internally, I would like to call it the GREAT effect, GREAT. Firstly, our business and operation will become greener and more globally interconnected. Secondly, our type of energy solutions or energy innovation will bring about more resilient, reliable, and responsive solution to the marketplace and the end user. E, we will see more electrification, will bring about and enable more end-use electrification, whether mobility, heating, as well as enhancement in energy efficiency, mainly technology-based type of energy efficiency. Recently, we also just contracted with our preferred OEM GE to do a massive upgrade in one of our existing unit in the generation fleet that will translate down to pretty substantive carbon footprint reduction. Besides that, also enhance availability and fuel conservation. The A is really availability, affordability, and accessibility. So I think net as very well summarized by Shi Chun earlier, we need to balance the affordability portion as we pursue more sustainable development, besides balancing the security aspect. Lastly, the T, we are very technology optimistic. So we see technology as a force multiplier that will bring ecosystem partners together. So to your question about Capital, how we pivot, essentially by 2025 and 2030, literally a greener operation and business solution, more reliable, responsive, and resilient solution, more electrification and energy efficiency being the mainstay, affordability, availability, and lastly, technology as a force multiplier.
Thank you. I think a lot of things that you mentioned is very much in line with what EMA we call the energy trilemma, whereby we're also trying to balance between environmental sustainability, which of course now has taken on huge importance with affordability and energy security. And it is this trade-off that is always in place, no matter what the fuel source, no matter what the innovation. And that's where I really want to ask Esther this question, because you have been at the forefront on pushing for green buildings long before it was conventional wisdom, and long before I think people accept that this is really the way to go and that it's not really as costly as it seems. But you've had to battle from the start, to prove to people that getting to be a lot more sustainable or even to be net zero energy actually in the long run is a viable business proposition. Could you tell us a little bit more about your journey and also what CDL is doing in this space to continue to push the boundaries of green buildings?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on this panel. And I would like to share from really CDL as home builder. Our core business is to build home and also commercial property and also as a landlord. And studies show that actually people spend about 90% of their time indoor. That includes home, that includes your office space or entertainment space, schools and all that. So buildings definitely have a big role to the environmental impact. And globally, almost buildings and construction account for almost 40% of greenhouse gas emissions. So as far back as in the 1990s, when I joined CDL in 1995 January, the group was already on this globalization. And what we are looking at is not just Singapore. At that time, when I joined the company, it was about 9 countries, and today we have presence and operations in 29 countries now. So what we feel is in our business, we can make a difference. And in the way we design, we build, and also manage our property, as well as engaging users and how people use the buildings has a really big impact on the carbon footprint as well. So we have actually was very fortunate. We started the journey really early. There was no pressure about climate change at that time in 95, and then we actually started, really committed to, green building. And we even launched our so-called first eco condominium in 2002, using solar energy to power the clubhouse. At that era, honestly, not many people are talking about using solar energy. But today, of course, everybody is talking about global race to zero. 120 countries have signed up. Thousands of businesses have also pledged to support that. So, IEA and COP26 are all stepping up, to call for the global level, national level, and also business level to step up towards a net zero future. So although we have started the journey early, we have actually adopted a very prudent approach. In 2015, we actually formalized everything into our climate change policy and also established very clear goals and targets and launched our sustainability blueprint in 2017, setting goals and targets that align with the global goals and climate action. And 2018, we actually launched our, successfully secure the SBTi's approval to validate our carbon reduction targets. That's the first among, Singapore real estate company. That was actually pledged against 2-degree warmer scenario. And currently we are working on 1.5 degree. And all these are interrelated. And in April, we actually took the very bold step to pledge our support to World Green Building Council's net zero carbon building commitment, pledging to achieve operational net zero for buildings that are under our direct control and management. It is definitely not easy, but we need to set ambitious targets and to set the benchmark and for the industry, and also engage the larger value chain to look at how we can step up. And enablers are many, which I can talk about it later, whether it's sustainable finance, innovation, technology. All these are enablers for the building sector to lower the carbon footprint.
Thank you. Let's move to some of the questions that the audience have asked. And I want to direct the following 2 questions to Shih Chun. Broadly, they are really about the future of fossil fuels and fossil fuel infrastructure in Singapore. The first question is, what does CMA see as the future of natural gas-based combined cycle gas turbines in Singapore? And the second one, more broadly, is how do you think Jurong Island, which has a lot of oil refineries and petrochemical plants, and of course it contributes a lot to our GDP, how do you see revamping itself as we emphasize sustainability and clean fuels?
Thanks. I think I will just talk a bit more about the energy landscape first. And as I pointed out earlier, 95% of all our power generation comes from natural gas, right? So natural gas powers Singapore. And this has been a shift over the last 20 years. Before that, we depended on fuel oil. And we have moved over to natural gas, which is the cleanest form of fossil fuel around. Now, going forward, we are going to bring in more solar. We're talking about electricity imports of renewable energy from regional countries as well. And we would expect the energy mix to change. I would just add one note of caution here that with infrastructure, things take time, right? It takes time to build infrastructure, to make big changes within the infrastructure sector. So 2030 looks like a pretty far away point, 10 years, 9 years from now. But really, in terms of infrastructure timelines, it's not that long, right? So we're talking about something like 2 gigawatt peak of solar by 2030. Now, one of the considerations about solar is that it doesn't generate all hours of the day. So because it doesn't generate at night, it doesn't generate when it's raining, the capacity factor is actually relatively low for solar. So even though we have 2 gigawatt peak of solar by 2030, it's only going to contribute to less than 5% of our energy mix in 2030. We're talking about electricity imports as well, but even then, the infrastructure for building subsea cables would take time to bring about. So by 2030, we're not going to see a dramatic change in terms of energy mix in Singapore. It's still going to be heavily reliant on natural gas within the system, although it's going to get cleaner. We are improving the efficiency of the combined cycle gas turbines. So, Cindy spoke about how Keppel was refurbishing and improving the efficiency of the units. And many of the other power generation companies are doing the same thing as well, right? And at the same time, we are bringing in, demand response to better improve the usage of energy within Singapore, so that buildings within the CDL family would be able to participate in these types of initiatives that will better manage our energy demand, allowing us to use energy more efficiently, allowing our power generation plants to operate at much higher efficiency levels as well. So natural gas will remain an important part of the energy mix for some time to come. That's up to 2030. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. As I said, it's the cleanest fossil fuel around. It is also a very reliable and secure energy source. There are many places around the world which we can buy natural gas and ship it to Singapore. So we are not dependent on any particular source. It is a very liquid market as well. So, prices are relatively stable, and we are assured that there's going to be a constant source of natural gas. But looking much further ahead to 2050, things will change because there's a much longer timeline. Now, we expect there to be more solar, of course, in Singapore. And we also expect there to be more renewable energy imports by that point in time. So all in all, there will be a much bigger mix of domestic clean sources within the energy mix. But more importantly, over the next 30 years, there's a lot of time for technology and innovative products and solutions from both the research institutions as well as companies to bring about new products and services. You're talking about hydrogen now as an alternative fuel. Most of the experts are saying that it's not quite available today because it's not quite commercially viable yet, but it's entirely possible within the 2030s or 2040s for that to be a major fuel source. And by that time, it's possible for much of our infrastructure to switch over to hydrogen as well, allowing us to further decarbonize the power sector. So those are some of the big shifts. There are a lot of uncertainties, of course, especially with technology. It's quite uncertain how things are going to move ahead, but I am confident, the same way Keppel is technology optimistic, that we will find solutions to our problems today. They will be able to decarbonize the world, and we should be able to balance the energy trilemma, more affordable, green, and reliable energy sources. The other question is more about Jurong Island. And that's a bigger and more complex discussion. We know that this is quite an important part of our economy. It's the petrochemical sector has been a key part of Singapore's economy for a very long time now, since the very beginning of Singapore, to be clear. And yes, it's true. many of the industries that we have on Jurong Island are heavily carbon intensive. But I would just want to highlight one point here about the industries that we have on Jurong Island. They are among the most efficient in the world. So there are regular benchmarks for many of these refineries, crackers, and other specialty chemical companies. And the factories and plants that are based in Singapore on Jurong Island consistently do very well in international benchmarks. So that's one of the things that we, not necessarily EMA, but the government is working very hard with industry on to improve the efficiency of the plants and production facilities on Jurong Island, to constantly reduce the carbon emissions, investing in alternatives such as carbon capture solutions and green hydrogen, which will be able to help decarbonize some of the production processes on Jurong Island and help us move towards our low emissions development strategy of reaching net zero as soon as possible in the second half of the century. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question that's obviously very close to Singaporeans' hearts, which is, what sort of jobs can we expect in this future green economy? So can I invite maybe Cindy, Esther, and maybe even Boon Ho to comment from your company's perspective. What sort of exciting jobs are there, especially for people who are going to be entering a job market in the next few years? They could be studying university now. They could be thinking about what the future holds. What do you think holds for them? Green buildings, offshore renewables. What are some of the things that we can look forward to?
Ladies
Should I
first.
start first? Yes. Thanks, Boon Ho. Let me start first. Well, incidentally, just last month, I participated in a tripartite panel, and the same topic was raised, workforce and green jobs as we shift or pivot towards green economy. Now, within Keppel, or at least within Keppel Infrastructure, we strongly believe that the end goal towards energy transition ought to be improving lives and living environment. Energy transition is a means to an end. Decarbonizing the world, going for sustainable development, the end goal is really to improve lives and living environment. And that would also mean livelihood. So as we go along energy transition, we have to humanize the process. Meaning, in our earnestness to accelerate, which is well and good, we pull through economic growth, economic opportunity, we must not leave any part of the workforce or talent pool behind. So adding to what Xiu Chun said about Jurong Island, or the larger power sector or the larger energy sector, a lot of the infrastructure have very high capital investment. And as we transit or as we shift, we have to be mindful that we do not dislocate or displace sector in a very abrupt and abrasive manner. So the transition in terms of velocity and the energy mix must be curated according to trade-offs, criteria, commercial viability, and like I said, literally our workforce and talent pool, are they in terms of capability and mindset ready? So I think this transition ought to be like how we manage the water story. In fact, I see a very close parallel. Incidentally, Keppel Infrastructure is very vested and water story is very close to our heart, because the first new water plant PPP project, Ulu Pandan New Water Plant, was designed, built and invested by Keppel. It was opened by PM Lee back in 2007. And in February this year, incidentally, we officially opened the Keppel Marina East Desalination Plant, and again by PM Lee. So we saw how the water story, in terms of 4 taps, reservoir, which is natural catchment, raw water import from Malaysia, as well as new water, or we call it water reuse, and desalination. These 4 taps can coexist, but as to how we curate the mix in terms of affordability and the cost effectiveness of the molecule is something that we need to time according to technology readiness, commercial and cost competitiveness, behavior and mindset of our ecosystem partner industries and the end use. So we have already started investing in this energy transition workforce uplift by having our workforce, whether it's operator, researcher, engineers, developer, working alongside like-minded ecosystem partner, and also the academia, researchers, not forgetting, very importantly, regulators and agencies like EMA, PUB, A-STAR, all the very respected organizer for this seminar.
Well, can I just expand on that very positive note that Cindy has started from a business perspective? Just give you some example that in fact the constraints that we have on solar energy, we have actually stepped up on a lot of R&D. We set up a tropical technology lab with NUS for some years now, and we are actually currently also testing, because of limited space. We are looking at BIPV for the longest time, for a few years. And although the progress has not been really as fast as what we want, and currently we are actually testing a bifacial, building integrated PV panels at our City Square Mall, and hopefully, the technology will improve, and the solar panel will look better, and also it can be integrated into the facade rather than relying on land, which is really, scarcity of land is a very big challenge for solar panels. And then, the other ones we are looking at is, of course, efficiency. When you talk about solar energy, is actually the yield is very, very important. It's not just the space and the area as well. So how do we maintain to make sure that all the panels are actually, all the energies are at the, optimal level? We actually have already been testing with a couple of, innovators. One are still, they are still students, NUS and the NTU, they call it the smart panel. The other one is a QE lab that we have been working on them to, working with them to use drone technologies to track performance of solar panels that are not so accessible. Without tracking, we don't know the technology. And definitely green jobs are on the rise. And I'm in this field for 20 over years in sustainability. I never need to, hire so many people, and then everybody was asking me, hey, do you have anyone to recommend to me? Sustainability professionals are, really in demand now, So I said, yeah, join the queue. There are a lot of, such a demand now. And in fact, last year, while the, the economy and the world came to almost a halt, our CDL sustainability portfolio has expanded, and we built up a team of, a few engineers just to focus on sustainable technology and innovation. So we have to walk the talk. We can't just say that, oh, innovation, technology are very important. Everybody will say that whether you really, invest time and invest manpower to do so, that will be the biggest challenge. And we hope that with investing, by investing more dedicated effort, more engineers to work on that, and also supporting innovation and R&D, we hope that we can accelerate the action and also impact.
Thank you. So before Boon Ho, you answer, let me tag on a question that one of the audience had, which was really about maritime sector decarbonization. So besides talking about opportunities, job opportunities, how do you see the maritime sector evolving, especially the role of Singapore as a bunker hub? And then obviously that means that we have to be a leader then in low carbon bunker fuel too.
Absolutely. Actually, the two questions are related. The fact of the matter in the end is that the demand for cleaner fuels in the maritime sector is clearly on the rise. It's dictated by IMO 2050. So the decarbonization of the maritime sector in accordance with IMO 2050 has to effectively halve as well. So that is a pretty ambitious target, considering you have to coordinate with the world of shipping. It's not any single country, it's the entire industry globally. Of course, Singapore has this one advantage wherein we are the world's largest, by far, bunkering hub. As a result of which, it behooves us, therefore, to use this opportunity and our position to influence, in my view, the developments in the decarbonisation space for maritime. This links to the jobs, of course, as well. Fact of the matter in the end is that the kind of future fuels that maritime is looking for is kind of no different from the kind of fuels that power generation is also looking for. It's a derivative of or a carrier of hydrogen of some form. Generally, that will be the case, whether it would be ammonia, whether it would be methanol. Effectively, that's what we're talking about. As also possibly for smaller craft fuel cells, but they will also be hydrogen fuel cells, as it were. So the long and short of it is that the opportunity is therefore for us to find, together with the rest of the industry, these new technologies, these new fuels that we can commercialize, that we can get scale for. Now, in order to achieve that level of scale, so that everything becomes viable for a maritime hub such as Singapore to adopt, we would need proof of concepts. And this is where I'm very grateful to the likes of EMA for creating, and MPA as well, for creating an environment where proof of concepts are encouraged among supply chain participants. And Jurong Port is indeed one of such participants because we are the land-sea interface. It is also through this land-sea interface that the people that we would like to hire in this particular space would be needed, i.e., we would need very enterprising young men and women, very imaginative, very obviously green-oriented, to align the interests of the various participants along such a supply chain. These could be green hydrogen traders, if you like. These could be the shipping companies that would be involved in transporting such green hydrogen. It would be talking to players who would be looking at setting up the infrastructure that the port operators such as Jurong Port, we would need to handle such green hydrogen safely. It would require downstream coordination with the likes of power generators, or rather people who are in GenCos who are looking to create green electrons or generate green electrons. So you can see this entire supply chain that has to come together with Jurong Port as one of the players. And we obviously would be looking for enterprising young men and women who have the imagination, the ability to align the interests of multiple stakeholders, so that everybody can come to the table, everybody can bring something to the dinner table and have a good experience, and not just a good experience from enriching economically, but also ability to create something that can scalable, that can then be adopted by industry as a whole.
Thank you. We have time really just for one final brief comment. I want to circle back to Shih Chun on this. The whole energy transformation is something that goes clearly beyond EMA. I would say it goes beyond even the whole of government. It really involves everyone in Singapore, every stakeholder to be involved in it. Do you have a message for the audience on the sort of partnership that we are looking for to make this happen?
I think you've got that absolutely right. And I think Moslow had mentioned the same thing as well, that really, in order for this to happen, we really require everyone to play a part in this. There's innovation required, new technology that's needed to solve many of the problems that we have today. We need, we need ideas. We need people to change their mindsets about how things are going forward as well, how we use energy, how energy is supplied, and maybe pay a little bit more for more sustainable energy sources. And we need investments from companies like Jurong Port, from CDL, from Capel as well, to make many of these things happen, to bring these technologies to Singapore, to bring these technologies to consumers and companies as well, so that we can move forward on this journey towards a cleaner energy landscape, preferably bringing down costs as well, and maintaining the same reliable energy that we have come to depend on for a very long time now. So I think those are my parting thoughts. It's absolutely key in terms of how we work together, and each, as what Boon Ho said, brings something to the table, and it's a bigger whole because all of us are working together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for a most interesting and stimulating discussion. To echo Shishun's words, we all need to do this together, but together, I'm sure we can do it. Thank you, and I'll hand the time back to Xue Ping.
Thank you, panelists.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.